In this video, I'll be customizing the Hammond Collection T-Rex and turning it into the Buck Rex from the Lost World Jurassic Park. I'll be using the Marco Makes Rex head, as well as the Rod's Random Work articulated replacement feet. These are printed and sold by Suratech, and links to these parts will be in the description box below. For my reference material, I'll be using the Paleo Publications Style Guide. They have a great color hex chart that tells you the exact palette of colors you'll need for the Buck Deco. You can go to colorhex.com and just type in the color code and it'll tell you what colors you'll need to mix together to achieve the particular color. It's a good tool to have on hand for when eyeballing it just isn't working. Now before we start slinging paint, it's important to prep the body as best as we can to minimize the amount of paint rubs later on. None of this will completely stop accidental paint rubs, but it will drastically cut down on them. But this is just the nature of the beast when it comes to painting highly articulated figures like this. For example, the mid-torso has plastic on plastic rubbing, which means that if you paint this and you go to move it later on, friction caused by the plastic touching each other will immediately scrape the paint off. It's like this for the knees and the hips. Pretty much everywhere on this figure is a paint rub nightmare. So what you want to do is move the torso around and feel for spots that touch. Once you spot one, take an X-Acto knife and carefully trim away the plastic from the inside of the torso. Once you get enough of the excess plastic trimmed away, take some fine grit sandpaper and slide it inside the joint and rotate the torso against the sandpaper to sand that area down smooth. Just repeat these steps for the rest of the articulation areas on the body. As for making the thicker neck, I sculpted that using Milliput epoxy putty. If you want to see how to do that, go check out Marco's video. He shows you exactly how to go about creating the neck and incorporating it into the articulation. So with all of the prep work done, we can finally start to sling some paint. So let's jump in and get started. So I'm going to start off by using dark green ink for the base color. I know he is a lighter green, but this step is just to get the plastic one uniform color, and since the ink is highly pigmented and durable, once it's cured, it'll stand a better chance of soaking into the plastic and staining it, and hopefully cut down on any bad paint rubbing. Now that the ink is done, we'll move on and do some dry brushing. First highlight color to go down is Vallejo Goblin Green, and I'll apply this pretty heavy-handed all over the figure. With the second highlight, I want it to be slightly lighter than Goblin Green, so I added a couple drops of yellow ochre to the Goblin Green, and I'll apply this pass very light-handed, just feathering the paint onto the raised areas. And you can see here the effect you get by using a dark base with a medium and light color combination dry brushing. Now I'll start to focus on the back, and for that I'm going to go in first with a concentrated dry brushing of just straight yellow ochre all along the ridge of the spine. I really want the dry brushing to be heavy-handed to create some depth in that yellow, and then I'm going to jump over to my airbrush and lay down a thin glaze of transparent yellow ochre all along the spine, and then back to my dry brush for one final highlight pass. So the last thing to paint is the underside. For that, I'm just going to go in with some Vallejo light green gray and carefully lay that down and fade it up into the green. It's pretty straightforward here, but that is pretty much it for the main body section. I'm going to go ahead and set the body aside for now, and we'll get resituated and come back and start working on the head. Welcome back, guys. Let's not waste any time and jump right into painting this T-Rex head. First, I'm going in with Vallejo light green gray to match the underbelly that we just finished painting in the last portion of this video. And then I'll do a light pass of Vallejo dead flesh along the gum line, followed by a pass on top of that with Goblin Green. I'll carry that same green up into the top part of the head, just sort of hitting the edges and the ridges along the face. Jumping back down to the lower jaw, I'm going to start to fill in some of the scales. This can be a very tedious and a very time-consuming process, but it's not super difficult. It's essentially just following the details in Marco's sculpt and coloring them in. There's no real trick here, just a matter of getting in there and grinding out those scales. Once you get a rhythm going though, you can knock them out in no time. I should also mention the colors that I'm using for the scales. They are a mix of English Ivy Green and a little bit of black, leaning heavier on the English Ivy Green side. Now that all of these scales are done, I'm going to apply some transparent glazes. First one being an olive green glaze. This is just a highly thinned down green ink, nothing fancy. I want to concentrate that glaze on the areas where I painted the scales. Next, I'll go in with a glaze of transparent yellow ochre and focus that on the overall head section to blend and tie everything together. Now I'm going to dip back into my ivy green black mix that I used for the scales, and I'm going to thin it down a little bit more, almost like a hair above a wash. And I'm going to carefully draw on the stripes on the snout. Then I'll grab some leather brown and add some extra details to the face, like painting in those little things on the sides of his cheeks, and then taking a dry brush with that leather brown and dry brushing it over those little ridges across his snout. Next up, we'll go ahead and fill in his scars. For that, I'll be laying down a coat of flesh tone, and I'm thinning it down using a fine tip brush, and I'm just kind of letting it flow into each little sculpted scar. When that dries, we'll go ahead and lay down a flesh wash. And lately I've been getting into using these fidget poppers for paints and washes. They're great because paint won't stick to them because they are silicone. So when the paint dries in one of the pockets, you can just pop it out. It's a great paint palette to have on hand. I definitely recommend grabbing one. Now we'll go ahead and start working on the teeth, and I'll actually start off first by painting the gums with barbarian flesh. I like using barbarian flesh for the gums because it has a nice red warm tone to it. And then once that's dry, I'll go back in and paint all of the teeth with an off-white, and then I'll finish them off with a wash of yellow ochre. And here we are. The head is done. It's looking great. And now we can attach it to the body and start working on the patterns and all of the final details. So I'm going to go ahead and take a break, get resituated, and when I come back, we'll finish up this buck. So we'll see you in a few. All right, we are back and made it to the home stretch portion of this video. So off camera, I ended up making the yellow on the back just a hair darker and a little wider to give myself some more playroom with the patterns. Now it's just a matter of laying down all of the dark stripes. So I'll be going back in with that same dark mix that I've been using, the ivy green and black, and I of course have it thinned down so it'll flow smoothly across the sculpt. And I'm just going in and blotting and dabbing the paint on, and you can see I'm leaving roughly about half an inch or so of yellow exposed, and I'm just focusing on getting the dark patterns down, and then I'll go back in after and tighten everything up. So the main priority is just getting paint onto plastic. Once my rough sketch is done, then I'll throw that paint in my airbrush, and I'm going to clean up those patterns by fixing and tightening up the edges just to kind of smooth everything out and give them a cleaner transition. The last thing to do is paint all of the claws, and for that I'll be using matte black paint, and then I'll take some matte varnish and I'll seal him up with several coats of varnish just to lock that paint in. And after all of that hard work, this bad boy is done and ready to rock and roll. So we're going to grab him and transfer him over to the photo booth and wrap this video up. So as always, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me and watching. I hope you found this video helpful and it has inspired you in some way, shape, or form. If you give this or any repaint a shot, remember to tag me over on Instagram at the Jurassic Park Compound because I'd love to see how yours turns out. All of the materials and upgrade parts I used in this video will be linked down below in the description box, so if you need anything, you can grab it straight from there. In the meantime, if you need more Jurassic related content or you like to see more shots of the bull T-Rex in all of his Lost World glory, I will be posting a bunch of photos over on Instagram throughout the week, so go ahead and follow the link down below to check those out. So that is all I've got for this video. You guys take care, and I'll see you around the compound.